Welcome, everyone, to the IFS Down Under podcast, where we have deep conversations with leaders in the IFS community and share the stories and the wisdom of Australian IFS therapists. I'm your host, Oliver Brook. I'm here today with my co-host, Lorani Lees. Welcome, Lorani. Great to be with you again.
Good to see you as well, Ollie. And hello, Daphne.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, welcome, Daphne. So just before we, fully introduce you and Rani's going to do a little bio for you, I'm going to do an acknowledgement of country and maybe talk about like the intention of this interview. So we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're meeting. For me, that's the Whadjuk Noongar people. And I pay my respects to their elders and their healers, past, present, and emerging. And also to any other ancestors or elders across Australia and the United States that might be present on the lands on which we're gathering. And I also want to pay my respects to each of our ancestral lineages, yours, Lorani, and yours, Daphne, and mine. And welcome any support that might be here for us today as we have this conversation. And the intention for this interview, is to really give you the space, Daphne, to share with our community about, your journey with IFS and EMDR, and to share, more about your new book. So I'll let Lorani talk a little bit about that. Yeah. Welcome, everyone.
Great.
Yeah, thanks, Ollie. So it's with great pleasure. Just want to welcome you, Daphne. So Daphne Fetter is a Ph.D, is a licensed psychologist, clinical trainer, consultant, author, and an international speaker dedicated to providing education on integrative trauma-informed therapies. She's certified in EMDR, is an EMDR-approved EMDR consultant with 20 years, probably even more, Daphne, of clinical experience providing trauma treatment, and a certified ancestral lineage healing practitioner. So Daphne is experienced in working with intergenerational and historical traumas. And what's very exciting is that Daphne is also going to be releasing her very soon exciting new book called Integrating IFS into EMDR Therapy, the step-by-step guide to complex trauma recovery. And it will be released on the 27th of January, so next week.
Yes, very soon. Yes, very soon. Mhm.
Oh, congratulations. Very exciting. So welcome, Daphne.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here. Yeah.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you on the show. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Yes, yes, a real treat. So Daphne, I just want to ask, as I was reading through your bio and just just thinking about your work, it's clear that you have such an extensive experience across a wide range of therapeutic modalities. Of course,
Mhm.
EMDR, IFS,
Yes.
ancestral lineage healing, which is Daniel Fall's work, and many
Mhm.
others. Could you share a little bit about how you first came into this field and how your training and professional interests have evolved over time?
Sure. So I came into this field. I actually started out after university in corporate America, which was not a good fit for me, and quickly left and actually felt pulled to really study spirituality, particularly Buddhism. So I actually moved to Thailand and lived there and spent time in different monasteries, Buddhist monasteries, studying Vipassana meditation and practicing and studying Buddhism. And then I ended up having one of my first kind of spiritual teachers there, who was more of a Taoist teacher. So also learned a lot of energy work practices. And came back to the States and started teaching meditation classes and mindfulness classes. And this was a long time ago. This was this was probably 2001, around that time. And I quickly, as I was sharing mindfulness practices with people, quickly learned that some people had trauma reactions. So I had a person have a lot of trauma memories come up once they slowed down and were really sitting with their body. And then I had another person have almost a panic attack practicing mindfulness meditation. So I decided if I was going to continue to offer some sort of mindfulness-based meditation class, I really needed to, become a trained therapist. So that's really where my journey started. It was really out of my own curiosity. And that curiosity has led me a lot of places in terms of learning different models, getting my master's, getting my PhD, studying IFS, studying EMDR, other models as well. I know, Lorena, you mentioned the Daniel For's model, the ancestral lineage healing model, which is to me very integrative also in my work. No matter what modality I'm doing, I'm always also kind of thinking of the intergenerational piece and the ancestral piece as well. But yes, so that's really how I ended up here. And I really consider myself, I'm very integrative, thus my book that's really focused on integrating EMDR and internal family systems. So I really consider myself more of an integrative trauma consultant. More than anything in terms of just providing support to other mental health providers.
Yeah, so wonderful, Daphne. I can hear the breadth and depth of that experience and the um and the journey of of all your experiences. I'm just wondering, Daphne, for our listeners who are more IFS focused and may need a little bit of refresher on EMDR,
Mhm.
could you please just give us almost like an EMDR 101 intro so that we can speak a bit more about the integration?
Absolutely. So EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. And as the story goes, similar to IFS, it had a founder. And so the founder, Dr. Shapiro, was in graduate school herself, and she was walking through a park and noticed that her eyes moved back and forth very quickly. And she also had a trauma history and noticed that when she felt bad or had a trigger, if she moved her eyes back and forth really quickly, she felt calmer. So she began to experiment with that, and thus eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy, EMDR, was born. Since then, we now know so much more about the brain. So more recently, and I want to give credit to the founders of what's called EMDR 2.0, which is out of the Netherlands, we now understand that in terms of EMDR reprocessing, we're really taxing the working memory. That's what the eye movements do. So it's not necessarily the eye movements that are the magic part of EMDR, it's taxing the working memory. And we do that in lots of different ways in EMDR, including eye movements. So EMDR is, a trauma treatment. It's very evidence-based for lots of different populations, really for trauma treatment.
Yes, yes. And so a follow-up question to that, Daphne, then, what made you curious about bringing the two together?
Trauma treatment for anyone is not a one size fits all. And EMDR, there are different protocols for it, and you really do need to adapt the protocols to the client to really meet the client where they are. And my clinical experience is predominantly treating post-traumatic stress disorder and people that have complex trauma histories. And so you really have to adapt any EMDR protocol to really have it be beneficial. So what inspired me to write my book was just based on my clinical experience. When I learned internal family systems, how to help support a client's parts to give consent and be on board with the treatment to do reprocessing through EMDR was part of my excitement. Once I learned IFS, and you'll hear this from any EMDR therapist who ever has learned IFS. If they've learned EMDR first, it's impossible for them not to see some connection with IFS. They're beautiful, a beautiful pairing in terms of therapeutic modalities because they both are very non-pathological. They both believe in the natural healing mechanisms that are in the client that they naturally have, while IFS, that's more self. In EMDR, they have this notion of it's more brain oriented. It's called the adaptive information processing model, which we can see if we bring in IFS, that's self. And so they really pair just so beautifully together. So that's what really inspired me because I could actually see it helping people to blend these two practices and really support them no matter where they are in their therapy journey, whether they're just beginning therapy and need to kind of befriend parts first, whether they're really deep and they're ready to do more intensive trauma treatment like EMDR, the reprocessing of EMDR, or if they're really integrating therapeutic gains, we can move back into parts work and strengthen that with also some EMDR. So it's just a wonderful pairing of two models.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Daphne. Yeah. And I'm kind of wondering, is there a story or a particular moment in your clinical work that kind of captures the power of integrating those two? Like, could you share like an example of when that's really kind of come together, what you were just describing, like yeah.
Yeah, I think in the reprocessing in EMDR, once I knew the IFS protocol, particularly the healing steps and working with exiles, if people were getting stuck in reprocessing, so reprocessing is in EMDR is where you are working with traumatic memory and trying to desensitize it. So really bringing down, changing how it's stored in the brain, very similar to IFS, using memory reconsolidation, just like IFS does. And so I could see where people were getting stuck. If they weren't their brains weren't naturally able to move through it using EMDR protocol, then it's like, oh, let's, let that part know you're right here with it. Is there anything it needs from you? Does it need to be retrieved? Let's get it out of that scene so it knows who you are now. Let's give it an update of who you are. So a lot of befriending techniques and retrieval and techniques that we would do with the healing steps. I just started really noticing how much that helped, particularly the retrieval step, because by bringing in that retrieval step within EMDR, the reprocessing where we're working with traumatic memory, it really can decrease the activation, right? Because it really helps that part know that was over. This is over. That was then, this is now, as we say a lot in EMDR. In the EMDR world, we say that a lot. That was then, this is now. So we're helping that part know that was then, this is now, and really giving it a big update. And that changes the autonomic state of that part. So even on a physiological level, if that part is in high arousal or high anxiety, and we can use that retrieval step during reprocessing if we need to, that can bring down the arousal level of that part. So it can really connect to the client's self, and that can be reparative.
That's so interesting. And so what I'm hearing is that it's not kind of replacing the healing steps in the IFS model. It's like you're kind of adding in the reprocessing into the healing steps, and you kind of, yeah.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. And really with blending these two models, you can bring, with EMDR, we do have to follow with the framework of what's called the 8 phases, but in phase 4, which is when we do the trauma reprocessing, that's really what we're doing with those healing steps. So if a client is getting stuck and doing IFS, we can switch to EMDR and do the reprocessing using EMDR. If a client needs what we would consider an IFS, what we call interweaves in EMDR, where it's just an intervention that's more of a relational IFS intervention, we can do that in terms of blending the two models.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. And I think Ronnie's going to ask some more like nuanced questions about exactly what you're talking about. So I might kind of pause that here. And I just want to take us back to something you said before around, there's people in the IFS community, and at some points I've been one of them, and I've heard other people say that they feel kind of protective of IFS when they think about EMDR, and that some people are worried that it's going to impact the self to part relationship, and that because of
Hmm.
kind of the directive nature of doing the reprocessing. And I was just wondering, like, how does that work with protectors? And is that a thing really when you're integrating them in the way that you're describing? It doesn't sound like it is. It sounds like you kind of bring them on board. But how do you work with the protectors before you do any of the phase 4 reprocessing? Yeah.
Yeah, so we work with protectors more early on in the therapy, and that's just like we would in IFS. We get protector consent before we would do exile work in IFS, the same with EMDR. We want to get the protector consent and really follow the system and make sure parts are on board that we're going to do EMDR, and that
Mm.
they understand, they can ask questions, so that they can give us access to whatever we need to process through EMDR, whether that in general, we typically process exiles experiences in EMDR, but you can also work with protectors and do reprocessing with protectors too. So there's not a hard and fast rule about that. Yeah, so we would use befriending techniques from IFS with the understanding that our treatment plan will integrate EMDR at some point. I mean, if it's clinically appropriate, right? If the client's interested, if it makes sense, that it would be beneficial to them and they're interested in more accelerated trauma reprocessing, then they would be a good candidate for more of an integrative approach.
Yeah. Okay. And has that, the way that you just described it, sounded like that is the integrated approach, right? Using IFS to really get the protectors on board and be with them and reassure them and get their permission before using the reprocessing. Was that a part of the EMDR protocol before, or is that kind of been brought in from IFS? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great
Mm.
question. So no, it's not part of the protocol before. But
Yeah.
part of the EMDR protocol is to help the client have coping skills to really navigate emotion regulation before doing traditional EMDR. Bringing in IFS completely brings in, the client system in
Mm.
such a relational way, that we are really making sure that clients are aware of their parts. We're bringing them into consciousness so they're not surprised. Um, we can do that through parts mapping like we would in traditional IFS. We can do that with befriending, but all in the context of, okay, and we're going to do this with the intention of moving towards doing EMDR at some point. Yeah,
Yeah.
so prior to, without that integration, it's really more traditional coping skills, like
Mm.
grounding and, breathing techniques, visualization to prepare a client for reprocessing. My
Okay.
approach, as I describe in my book, is very integrative. I bring in, the IFS. I also honor the coping skills as well. Some parts do benefit from coping skills. It's more of that integrative approach. So it's not pure IFS.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, that makes a lot of sense to me. And so I guess like follow on from that. Actually, I want to give you an example. It's a personal one of my experience. So I experienced a number of kind of traumas in my childhood, and one of them was like a single incident physical assault when I was about
Mhm.
6 from an adult to me. And that traumatic memory bothered me, my whole teenage life and into my adult life. And before I found IFS, I had a few EMDR sessions on this
Hmm.
specific memory. And the therapist wasn't trained in IFS. So we just kind of went straight into the memory within like, I think it was maybe on the first session or even maybe the second. So it was really kind of quick, like straight into the
Hmm.
processing. And at the time, it worked in the sense that it desensitized that memory. Like it didn't come up and it wasn't as strong or activating anymore. But years later, I did an IFS session as a PA, and they asked us as the PAs to bring an exile that we'd already worked with, and I brought forward
Mm-hmm.
this memory. And when we were connecting with that part, and the three kind of therapists were helping me with this part, it was like they were in this, like the EMDR had taken them into a state where the memory was like dissociated, or like there wasn't a strong
Interesting.
connection anymore from
Mm-hmm.
doing the reprocessing. And then I
Mm-hmm.
still, like you've described, the exile still needed some witnessing, and it still needed a retrieval, and it still needed like a bit of a do-over. And
Mm-hmm.
so what you're saying really makes sense to me, that actually like the two approaches alone are missing something. But
Mm-hmm.
kind of like once I got the IFS part with that exile, the rest of kind of the healing steps, it felt way more complete. Even though
Mm-hmm.
the EMDR had kind of like worked, like, like I was able
Uh-huh.
to function and it helped me kind of externally. So I just wanted your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a great case example. Yeah, so I mean, I'd be curious. What I'm hearing is it sounds like the
mm,
EMDR desensitized the memory in terms of bringing down the reactivity, but in
yeah,
terms of so you could function and kind of move on with your life. But in terms of the integrative piece of, okay, what does that mean for you and this part? And what does that part need now going forward in your life?
mm,
That's where the IFS can really help with that integrative work, even after the sort of desensitization that trauma reprocessing can do during EMDR.
yeah.
Um, yeah, does that resonate?
Yeah, it really resonates.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And before you integrated the two, like I've heard other stories like that of people experiencing EMDR without IFS, and then there's like a protective backlash after the reprocessing.
Uh-huh.
Is that a
hmm
thing? Yeah, have people
It
noticed
can
that?
happen. Yeah, it
Yeah,
can happen. I think it's less likely to happen with consent of the protectors.
yeah,
It's more likely to happen with somebody with more of a complex trauma history where they may not, we might have thought we got consent of all their parts, but we didn't, or some, there was other system that we weren't aware of that then came online after the processing. So even if there's backlash in this system, whether we're doing EMDR or IFS, we can still, that would be the time to really use IFS for repair. I mean, that's a wonderful thing that IFS offers, among many things IFS offers, is in terms of that internal repair work around,
mm,
wow, I didn't know you were upset, or we went a place you weren't expecting. What do you need from me? What do you need from the client? Let's really acknowledge what happened and have a repair. Um, and so it can really offer that as an opportunity if a client needs that, or if that backlash happens. And because the backlash can happen in pure IFS, it can happen in pure EMDR. It can happen, although less likely in my experience with an integrative approach. But it can happen.
yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate you naming that. Yeah, those hidden systems of protectors. I liked what you said,
Uh-huh.
that didn't come forward, that didn't express their concerns or weren't noticed in the session by the client or the therapist. Yeah, they can still have backlash, even if we've got the permission. Yeah.
Sure. And bringing in more of the EMDR sort of holistic approach, more of the neuroscience approach that EMDR brings. When we're bringing in EMDR, we are considering that parts are on a memory network. So in IFS, we're doing typically, parts are in a system of a memory network, but we may not get to the whole system. We may, but we may not, right? It just depends. In EMDR, it's really intended to, really work with an entire memory network. And so when we think of backlash, we can get curious around, okay, maybe those parts, the client wasn't conscious of them. Maybe we're in a different part of the memory network. One of the most common backlashes that I've experienced clinically is more clients having access to their anger, which is actually progress. that may show up as backlash also, but it actually, big picture, is like this client never had permission to feel angry in their system. So for anger to come up is actually a really healing moment for them, and for us to really welcome that. So I think it's, we can kind of think about backlash in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, that's so helpful, Daphne, because I often consider backlash as a way of, is information for the system. It's the feedback that the system is offering you. And the beauty about EMDR and IFS is that it's not linear. You can go back. So for example, with EMDR, even if you're in the midst of doing the phase 4 and there's, a reaction, there's an opportunity for you to pause, stop, and then you can go back to phase 2 to really understand what just came up. And that's where our IFS training, understanding of parts can really come into handy, where we can explore that part. And this example you're mentioning about a part that carries anger, and then doing that befriending and going back and actually creating more self-energy, or not creating, accessing more self-energy. And also in the EMDR, where we talk about the adaptive information, there's more adaptive information now.
Yes.
And that can then really lay out the foundation again to go back to desensitizing and working with that trauma. So it's quite a beautiful marriage in a way, because you can flow in and out in different phases, bringing in the IFS concepts at any of those phases.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and from my experience, Daphne, that's the one thing I look out for when we're doing phase 2 of EMDR. I'm really using a lot of IFS. I'm hearing for parts, I'm hearing for any burdens that these parts are carrying, and then working with them in phase 2 to support them to go to phase 3 and 4. So there are things that I'm looking out for and take into consideration. I'm just curious about, for you though, like what factors guide your decision to either offer IFS or offer EMDR, or when the integration of the two models would be helpful? I mean, what are you looking out for?
That's a great question. If a client has any dissociative parts, I'm going to slow down and start with IFS, just as a general rule. And that's also true just even in pure EMDR. We usually do some sort of dissociative screener before we would do EMDR. So if a client has some dissociative parts, that's a signal for me to, okay, we're going to start with IFS. I really just am I try to be as transparent as possible with my clients around giving them choices, around explain the two models. I say I typically start with IFS even if a client is raring to go in EMDR. I always say, okay, well, let's pause. We're still going to check in with protectors before we go to begin doing EMDR reprocessing. So dissociation, definitely. I think also just if I've started with more pure IFS and I'm noticing, like if the client doesn't have access to self, if a client has a really challenging time accessing self, and we've tried lots of things, and the client is, we're, compliant, we're working together well, we have a good working alliance. And just due to the trauma history, the client is often blended with parts, which is very normal, of course, for many clients, particularly early on in IFS. But I would say I'm going to begin to think a little bit differently about treatment choices. If a client consistently has a hard time accessing self, and they may have a hard time for many reasons, trusting therapy, trusting IFS, trusting, whatever we're doing in therapy. And so I might offer some EMDR to actually bring down distress. And what I've found, some clients benefit from doing EMDR. We still get consent of the protectors. We don't bypass them. We still get consent. But even if they're blended, you can do EMDR with a client in a blended state. And so most of the time, people are blended when they're doing EMDR, and that's absolutely normal. And so sometimes I bring in IFS if a client can't access self, and then we may pause the EMDR after we clear a target. The client has more access to self and wants to actually do more internal reparative work with IFS. So we can toggle really back and forth. We have lots of choices depending on the client.
Yeah, Daphne, can I just clarify on that? When you say that when a part is blended and you
Mhm.
use EMDR, two questions. Are you doing microprocessing, like bilateral stimulation, or you're doing like the full 20 seconds of bilateral stimulation to unblend?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you have a choice. You can try to do, I would start probably with what I've created STAR to do slow tapping to send a message to a part. So we're basically doing, if you're trained in EMDR, this is the butterfly hug, but we're using it relationally with a part to see if the part can take in and register that someone's here, and unblend that way. So we can do some slow bilateral stimulation. There are, people in the EMDR IFS integration world that will go ahead and do fast. And that totally can be helpful. I, at this point, would uh, go right into 2.0, to be honest, EMDR 2.0, because it is so profound and taxing the working memory. And do fast, basically fast, than using taxation exercises. Yeah. So that might be an unexpected answer. But basically, the bottom line is people have choices, right? And we're following where, can the client access self? That's like, what do they need for support? If it's, I've had clients with complex trauma histories where they can have their protector step back to do the exile work, and then there's so many exiles that they like rush the system and fled the client multiple times, where then it's, we spend the majority of session trying to return to accessing self. That type of client would be a great candidate for an integrative approach where it's like, okay, protectors are giving consent, the exile is present, they're wanting to blend with you. Let's go for it with the EMDR.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes me think of a few other questions. So, I know Lorani has some background with EMDR, but I don't have very much except for those 2 sessions and a few online things. But I've never been trained in it. So I heard a few terms that maybe myself and other listeners won't know what they are. So could you explain, like, what are the phases of the model of EMDR? You mentioned phase 2 and you mentioned phase 4.
Yeah.
Like, what are these phases that you mentioned?
Yeah. So in EMDR, there's 8 phases. The first phase is really about history taking, assessment. The second phase is called resource development, where we're doing coping skills. I can go ahead and provide the integrative approach with that. So essentially, we can think of phase 1 and phase 2. With a complex trauma client, we're integrating both of those, meaning we're bringing in coping skills in the first session. We can also bring in the parts conceptualization in by doing parts mapping very early on in phase 1 or phase 2. Phase 3 and phase 4 go together in EMDR. So phase 3 is where we activate the traumatic memory. We call it assessment in EMDR. So we're asking very specific questions to activate a traumatic memory network. So we're wanting a high distress on a scale of 0 to 10. We're wanting something we can work with that's activated.
Yeah.
So we're activating it in phase 3, and then phase 4, we begin the taxation of working memory. Traditionally, that's through eye movements or through any form of bilateral stimulation. So we continue with that. In EMDR, we're looking for these SUDs to go down. SUD stands for subjective units of distress. So say if a client starts on a scale of 0 to 10 at a 10, we're wanting that number in terms of how distressing it is to go down to a 0 or as close as a 0 as it can be realistically. At which point that happens, right? Then we move to phase 5. Okay. If a client doesn't, I guess I'll go ahead and continue. So phase 5 is we install a positive cognition. So in EMDR, when we're doing those assessment questions in phase 3, we ask, what's the image of the worst part of it? What's the negative belief that goes with that? What would you prefer to believe about yourself instead? What are you feeling now? How distressing is it on a scale of 0 to 10? And where do you feel it in your body? And then that's when we begin the eye movements. So if a client, is as low as they can be, say a 0, a 1, or maybe a 2, if they say that that's as low as it can be, we then install a positive cognition in phase 5. We do that by having the client identify if that original positive cognition still fits, or if there's words that fit better now that it's more resolved, and then have them focus on the original image or original event as they're saying that kind of to themselves, that positive cognition. Then phase 6 is we have them do a body scan head to toe without any tapping or bilateral stimulation at all, just to see if there's any somatic memory. So EMDR does really honor the reality of, memory being held in the body as well. So we're looking for body sensations there connected to that original target. Phase 7 is closure, okay, of the session or of that target. Phase 8 is reevaluation. So say if we didn't get, say in one session, most EMDR, unless it's a single incident trauma, most EMDR will take more than one session. That's very normal. I will, with the caveat, EMDR 2.0 can bring down pretty quickly in terms of that SUDS, okay? But in phase 8, we reevaluate. So we say, okay, let's go back to that image. The next session, we go back to that original image. What do you notice now? And then we reassess it and continue processing until it gets to a 0. So I know that was a lot, but those are the 8 phases. To answer that question.
Yeah, thank you so much for answering it. My system really liked your answer, and it's nice to hear the detail of it. And I noticed several things when you were saying activating the traumatic network and trying to get a strong activation. That sounds so similar to inviting the exile to fully blend so that the person can
Totally
fully experience them and be with them. And and also when you were talking about installing the positive cognition, and also before that asking about the negative beliefs, that again sounds like part of the unburdening process in IFS of releasing negative beliefs and bringing in positive qualities and beliefs. So it sounds like there's some real similarities that kind of connect through the two models. But yeah, thanks for
You're
sharing
absolutely
about the
getting the
phases.
connection.
Yeah.
Yes. You're having the aha moment that every EMDR therapist who's been trained in IFS has had too. It's like the similarities just stand out, right? With the negative
Yeah.
cognition and the burdens and the positive cognition and that invitation step in IFS. So they really are quite parallel in some ways.
And I just have one more question. Hope it's all right, Lauren. I keep jumping in. And what's EMDR 2.0? What does that mean?
Yeah. So again, I want to give Susie Matherson and Adjan, I believe I'm saying his name correctly, from the Netherlands. They are the originators of the 2.0 protocol. So the 2.0 protocol is a little different than standard protocol. So it's really focusing on desensitization and taxing the working memory. So it brings in different tasks, not solely the eye movements or bilateral stimulation. So you might actually have a client get up and stand and do a body movement to give their brain and body new data into the brain and into the system that's in contrast to the somatic memory. So I can give you a clinical example of, say, if a client say if where they're getting stuck in their trauma reprocessing is a somatic feeling, say if it's a feeling of fear in their chest, and that's what's stuck, right? That's what's sticking. In EMDR 2.0, we would then bring in a somatic thing. Okay, let's clap at a regular pattern and focus on that sensation. Let's have you move your body. Say if the client has their negative belief is I'm trapped. Okay, I want you to move your arms and make yourself as big as possible, right? While you're feeling that feeling of being trapped. So we're giving contrasting information and data into the body at the same time as the client's trying to focus on the trauma memory. So in EMDR, we talk about this, kind of 1 foot here in the present, 1 foot in the trauma memory when we're doing reprocessing. This is we're activating the trauma memory, and then we're trying to bring a distraction task to keep the client more present, which will actually help facilitate memory reconsolidation faster. It's all about efficiency with EMDR 2.0. So that's the short version. Again, I'm a clinician trained in it, but I'm not the founder of it. So I want to give full respect to, just like with Dick Schwartz, obviously, Dick Schwartz and Dr. Shapiro with EMDR. We have all these wonderful founders that have come up with these life-changing models.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of founders and amazing giants in the field, Daphne, in your bio, an interesting fact came up for me that you did your postdoctoral fellowship in clinical psychology at the Trauma Center under the direct supervision of the one and only Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. How was that experience? I mean, Ollie and I are so fascinated and interested in that. Can you share some of your most memorable moments during that time?
Sure. Well, for one, I was just reflecting on that recently. We had to do an essay, right? Just to even get an interview for that. We had to write a case conceptualization of a trauma client. And they, at that time, the trauma centers had sort of many evolutions. But when I was there, it was specialized in complex PTSD, people with dissociative disorders and complex PTSD. So complicated cases. And so I wrote my essay and I did it all as an IFS case conceptualization because I'd already been exposed to IFS by that time. And then I was told I got the interview because I was applying an IFS case conceptualization. And I was like, okay, great. Because I love IFS also. And this was while I worked with Bessel while he was writing The Body Keeps the Score. So he was writing a book at the time that I worked directly under him. He was my direct supervisor and definitely, have fond memories of working with him for sure. So it was a wonderful mentor and learned a lot from him. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think from him, another thing that's coming up, he really was the first, him. And then I feel so grateful to just have taken lots and lots of trainings. I think also Janina Fisher, I could say the same thing, just bringing in the body and being aware of the nervous system, that when we're doing any sort of therapy, particularly with trauma, we are working and treating a nervous system, and that nervous system is part of the process. And so Bessel really helped me see clients through that lens as well, in terms of, okay, what state is the client in right now? Are they in hyperarousal? Are they in hypoarousal? So, I think that that's also a very memorable moment when he helped me kind of view clients more, bringing in the body and the nervous system.
Mm.
Yeah. Fond memories. Bessel.
Yeah. Yeah, you can really hear, the depth of your knowledge and your experience as you're describing, these different clinical examples and things. So it really comes through, Daphne. When you were just describing the EMDR 2.0, like, a concerned part came up of like, I don't know, like, what are the, 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 like, what Okay, so you're getting the exile to sort of fully be present and to be feeling all of their feelings and to be really there. And then you're like inviting the person to do a totally kind of different thing to kind of interrupt, the traumatic memory.
Mm-hmm.
And my like IFS therapist part's like, isn't that inviting in like a self-like part to kind of do something else? And
Mm-hmm.
couldn't that land for the exile, like you're like ignoring them or not like giving validation to their like the pain and the story
Mm-hmm.
of their experience? And so I'm just kind of wondering, like, I mean, it sounds like it works, as in like it reduces it makes them less sensitive to that traumatic memory. But what's the actually happening to the exile? Like, what's their experience in that? Do you find afterwards that they're like, oh, that was really help? Like, does the exile respond like that was helpful and they feel relieved, or do they respond? Yeah, I'm just wondering what happens
Yeah,
there.
I love that question. I so appreciate your concerned part. So I welcome all your parts and questions. This is great. I think it does depend on how you set it up in terms of the psychoeducation about what we're doing and why. With my clients, the clients in particular, with all my any client, I try to make sure, do you have any questions? You can ask questions at any time about what we're doing and why. Like this is your therapy, you deserve to know that. And if you ever have concerns or doubts or questions, like please ask. At all times, even when we're doing pure IFS, we're doing, integrative model with EMDR. So with EMDR 2.0, how I would set it up in terms of, say, if I'm activating a traumatic memory by starting with IFS and then getting to an exile, is inviting the exile to be part of the process and explaining it more like a game. Like, we're going to play a game. You're still here. You're still connected to this part. And we are going to play a distraction game, and that's going to help your brain actually help release the intensity of what you're carrying. Would you like to play? So
Mm.
it really depends on like the language, and I can definitely see, like, with your concern, we're not abandoning that part. We're not forgetting it. We're actually helping it. And we're bringing down distress first, and that helps the client access more self to do more of the internal repair work. I can give you a case example of doing 2.0 where this happened, where developmental trauma, intensive developmental trauma, and a client was, able to, uh, have a different experience in relationship to that repetitive traumatic memory that shows up as a chronic anxiety and dread, like something bad is about to happen at all times, right? So for a complex trauma client, that's more their lived experience potentially in their system. And that may be more than one part that's carrying that. But with EMDR 2.0, we can actually offer them a different experience in relationship to what happened. And so if we bring in the integrative lens, anytime we're doing reprocessing, whether it's 2.0 protocol or traditional EMDR protocol, we're helping the client access more self. So, if the client's blended, that's okay. We can still do 2.0. If the client, if we approach that exile, we're going to say, we're going to play a game. You're right here with me. We're doing this together. I'm going to check in on you, in 90 seconds or whatever our time is that we're doing the cognitive task or the bilateral stimulation. And I'm going to see what that was like for you, right? So we can weave in the relational aspect. So we're not abandoning, an exile when we're doing EMDR 2.0 or in honest, just with even traditional protocol with EMDR. Is what happens to that exile? Am I going to lose this part? What's going to happen to it? Is it going to go away? So there's such important questions to talk about with clients.
Mm. And just on that, Daphne, like, do you find that you need for the integration phase after you do the desensitization, do you find that it's helpful to bring in the IFS, the parts work to help to integrate, so to allow the XR to really be able to, you know, what we term in IFS is like to be able to take in and be able to see themselves, they're part of the system now. They're no longer exiled.
Yes. Yeah. Some clients need that integration work, or they're ready more for the repair, like you mentioned, Oliver, around your EMDR experience, and then revisiting that part years later. So sometimes it's very natural for clients to benefit from, after they're having therapeutic gains in EMDR, and say if they've cleared a target, or some clients even need, an EMDR session and then a pause just to check in. The next session doing IFS, just honoring where their system is, and then return to reprocessing. So we have a lot of choices. But yes, to answer your question, Lorraine, we can bring in the IFS for integration. I have found, it is an amazing opportunity to sit with a client that is having therapeutic gains in therapy, and can begin to experience that at that felt sense level. And in both EMDR, IFS, and integrative approach of both models, clients can experience that felt sense experience of change from therapy. And that is just such a rich moment as a clinician to celebrate, like, wow, look at what's changed. Let's really pause here and see, what does this part need from you now? Are there any other parts that need to take this in? What's it like to take this in? For our complex trauma clients, and I mentioned this in my book, there's often a part, even after therapeutic progress, that's hanging out, being like, okay, and when is the next shoe going to drop, right? It's maybe another protector that we need to bring in. It's like, okay, now you get your turn, right? Let's work with that future focus of, okay, now you've done some healing around this particular trauma. What does that mean now? And what does that mean to this part going forward in time? So there's lots of opportunities to bring in IFS with that integration work.
Wow.
How are we going for time, Ollie?
Yeah, we're coming towards the end. We've got maybe 5 more minutes. Yeah. So what's a gentle first step people could make who maybe, know about both approaches but haven't integrated them yet? Yeah. What's a gentle first step people could make?
Sure. Well, I'm definitely gonna plug my book. So that would be an easy first step, is to take a look at my book. There's also listening to this podcast, even listening and understanding that, I think having this holistic view of the treatment plan, not being only one model, but being an integrative approach, is really a first step in terms of, let's get curious around what parts are showing up related to the presenting issue, but bringing in that EMDR perspective of, this is not only a system of parts, that system is on a whole memory network that spans their entire life, and may span even, we can bring in intergenerational trauma, we can bring in ancestral trauma. So we want to just hold that very holistic approach of, okay, we are working with, there are likely going to be more parts revealed as we get to know a client, as we get to know their system. I think that would be a first step, and just in terms of case conceptualization.
Yeah, right.
Right. Well, as a way to kind of like wrap up our interview, Daphne, we just wanted to get to know you a little bit better.
Sure.
So with all of our guests, we have asked them what we term as the IFS fast and furious questions. So basically, it would be, I'll be asking you lots of questions about your system and we just want to invite you just to say the immediate thing that comes forward. Yeah, not
Okay.
too much thinking about it. So, you know, intellectual parts may need to kind of like step aside for a moment.
Okay. I have
Yeah,
lots of those, so yeah, I'll tell them to take a little break.
And so you up for the challenge?
Sure, I would love to.
Okay. So, Daphne, what is your most endearing managerial activity?
Oh goodness, I would say cleaning. Yeah, I love cleaning I have hardwood floors in my house where I live, and so I love steam cleaning my floors. I have one of my manager parts just loves that. So nice and clean.
Okay. What's your most favorite firefighter activity?
Oh my gosh. Probably eating chocolate.
Is there a gift? Is there an exile gift that you have reclaimed?
Definitely. Yeah, gosh, there's many. I would say I have dyslexia, and I can say wholeheartedly that exile that had a burden around being dyslexic and having a lot of developmental trauma as a child because of it, that exile pushed me to get my doctorate to prove to myself that I could do it, right? That part is healed and integrated, and I'm now reclaim the gifts of having dyslexia. And I love those gifts. I'm very grateful for the gifts of having a dyslexic brain.
And yes, and you're giving us that gifts as well. So thank you. Okay, a book that you are currently reading or listening to.
Oh my gosh. I tend to binge listen, and then I go through these dry spells where I'm not listening. I would say Mel Robbins' Let Them theory. Yeah.
Okay. And which historical figure would you like to invite to dinner?
What kind of figure?
Historical.
Oh, historical. Oh my gosh. I would say Dr. Martin Luther King. Yeah.
Yeah. And finally, Daphne, what legacy gift do you wish to leave behind?
Gosh, the ability to trust your intuition and trust yourself, even if reality may be telling you different, like this physical seen world may be telling you different things, to trust the unseen world and trust your intuition.
Thank you. Thank you for giving us a bit of a glimpse into your internal world.
Yeah, thank you. That's super fun. I'm curious. I want to ask the same questions to both of y'all.
Yeah, we can answer one each. What would you like to ask?
Yeah,
Yes.
I would love, okay, I'm gonna ask, yeah, could I hear favorite firefighter? And then I also want to hear the legacy piece that you're leaving. I love that.
Yeah,
My favorite
favorite
firefighter is gaming. Oh, sorry, Lorani.
gaming. Yeah.
Yeah, gaming for me.
But mine's like podcast listening. I love listening to podcasts.
Oh,
I just go crazy. It's very calming.
that's great.
What's your legacy, Lorani?
The legacy that I want to leave behind is a sense of valuing, really embracing your pain. That it's okay to embrace your pain. And that broken places and pieces in you can be reclaimed and can be put together again. So.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah. I think the one, for some reason, the one that's coming through to me at the moment is like leaving a different archetype for what a man can be in families and in the world. Yeah, to give young boys another option that might be more connected and loving and attuned, and it doesn't have to be this hypermasculine, isolated kind of figure. So something around that. Yeah.
Mhm.
And finally, you know, what's the best place for people to contact you? Where can they purchase your new book? Any links, things you want people to know about? Yeah, to get in
Yeah,
touch.
sure. I would just thank you for asking. I would just say my website, which is my name, Daphne, Daphne, Fatter. It's a strange last name. It's F as in Frank, Atter, Ph.D.com. And then any bookstore can order my book. It is on Amazon as well. Yes, and I'm super excited just to share this with everyone. So thank you so much for having me. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much for
Well,
being here.
thank
I
you.
really look forward to reading your book. Yeah, thanks,
Yes,
Daphne.
I'm very excited for it, Daphne. So thank you. Thank you so much for your time and sharing of all that you have gathered along the way. So,
Thank you.